Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this Golden State Warriors offseason preview. There were a few requests on the channel for this one. I know it took a little while to get to, but I did have a lot of fun watching the Golden State Warriors. If you did as well, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more so you don't miss out on more Warriors content in the future and just other NBA content in general. Really excited for this offseason preview as the Warriors are a very different team from other teams around the league. I really do enjoy talking about this team. I really love watching this team as well. Out of all of the teams in the NBA, and no, I'm not a Golden State Warriors fan, but they're probably one of my favorite teams to watch because of the style of play that they play with. Of course, everyone's going to say, well, yeah, they have Steph Curry. That's fun to watch. But even outside of Steph, I just think it is a very intriguing team with a lot of good players, but also a very unique style from the other 29 teams in the NBA. So because of that, I just enjoy watching this team naturally. And I hope you guys enjoy this offseason preview as much as I enjoy watching them on the court. Getting into the video preview here for the Warriors, we're going to talk about a season recap. We're going to look back at what this team was, what they're capable of doing going into next year will be how we conclude the video. And in between, we're going to talk about the NBA draft and NBA free agency, two pathways that typically the Warriors have not been super concerned about in recent years. Of course, the NBA draft, they have found some nice players along the pathway. You think about Kevon Looney being a really nice draft pick that they made a few years ago, and then also Jordan Poole. Of course, those are the two guys that really stand out. They've also made some other high selections in the past. James Wiseman didn't work out. They did, of course, draft Moody and also Kuminga, so they're going to have some young pieces still on this team. And then we'll also look at NBA free agency and what the Warriors could potentially look to do there. Just a quick disclaimer too, I do not talk about Jordan Poole trades as much in this video. I will talk about it just a hair, but if you do want to kind of hear about some potential Jordan Poole trades, I do have a video up on the channel. Just click on the channel icon, and that way you can go through, scroll down, and find that Jordan Poole trade video. It came out in the last 2 weeks or so, 3 weeks, so it's not too far down if you just scroll a little bit. Getting into it now here with the season recap, this Warriors team went 44-38, which was 6th in the Western Conference, and they were the defending champions. A lot of teams, a lot of people, of course, had them circled on their calendar, as is typical with former repeat champions, a team that has won 4 championships in the last 8 years up to this point. It'll be 9 after one of the 3 remaining teams left in the playoffs at this point ends up winning the NBA Finals this year. So the Warriors will not have won 5 out of 9, but they have won 4 out of 8 currently. And 44-38, I mean, it's a solid record, but they had unprecedented road struggles this year. They just could not win on the road. And I think I have a pretty good rationale as to why. I think the team chemistry really did come into effect on that. Of course, Draymond Green has talked about that on his own podcast. I don't listen to Draymond's podcast too frequently, but I do catch some snippets on social media of some of the important stuff that people find very interesting. And of course, Draymond has kind of admitted that, his incident with Jordan Poole did affect the team, and it kind of affected his ability to be a vocal leader and kind of set the tone for the team, which I do agree with. But I also think one thing that he didn't really talk about as much that I do believe came into effect here is part of the reason why they struggle on the road. You have a whole group of guys that have to essentially spend the entire road trip or, flight out to a certain city together. And when there's a little bit of tension, a little bit of awkwardness, and a little bit of lack of clarity for how you're supposed to interact with each other after an incident like that, I think that type of discomfort and some of the interesting situations that probably arose out of that do go into effect in helping the Warriors lose road games, simply because guys are less comfortable on the road because they're staying in the same hotel as some of these other players, and just that little dynamic I do think throws them off a little bit. And the NBA, I think a lot of people love to focus on the polarity, like how great some teams are, how bad some teams are. For the most part, the NBA is very, very tight and competitive. Like the fact that you look at it and the best teams oftentimes win games by like 3 or 4 points a game, and the worst teams oftentimes lose by 4 or 5 points a game. That's not blowout numbers. Think to a high school conference, for example. Oftentimes you walk into a high school gym and it's a 20-point deficit for one of the two teams, and they just really don't have a way of coming back. That's not really how the NBA is. Of course, there's so much talent, and the parity is pretty good. So any type of little struggle, little division that you have in your roster, in your locker room, that does go a long way. And especially on road trips when guys aren't comfortable being around each other the whole time, I do think that piles up a little bit, especially with how the Warriors started this season on the road. It was just absolutely brutal. So I think the Warriors probably going to next year feeling a little bit better about themselves, just because they're going to be at worst a little bit more comfortable. And I do think Jordan Poole had a massive down season for himself. He was wildly out of control for the most part. I think played outside of the team style a little bit more than even he did the year before. Of course, part of that comes with a huge payday, so you're going to operate a little bit differently. But there was just some issues. Jordan Poole had a bad year in my eyes, definitely. And I'm hoping that he can rebuild his stock. I'm hoping he figures it out and kind of finds who he's supposed to be on this team. But it's possible we could be talking about him on another team as soon as maybe next season. Steph Curry, there's not a lot to say about him other than this guy's just fantastic. I think one really important thing is it was notable that the Warriors, I do think, leaned into Steph Curry high pick and roll more than I've ever seen them do it before. And I think part of that is an aging roster. The team just a little bit more reliant on their primary star. We've seen a lot of teams in the past play that way, but usually they're lesser talented teams. You think about the Houston Rockets when they had James Harden. Like, you're not going to drop a Trevor Ariza or PJ Tucker isolation, right? That's just not going to be something you do. You're not going to run those two guys off of stagger screens trying to get them an open look. And Golden State still has some options there. Clay got off a ton of shots, but I think it was really the first moment where Steve Kerr was like, yeah, we kind of need Steph to be kind of on the ball a little bit more and a little bit more dominant. I think we really did see that in their first round series against the Kings. Of course, game 7, he went off for 50 points. He's just unbelievable. Steph Curry, I could sit here and rave about him all day. The on-ball stuff he's capable of doing, the off-ball stuff he's capable of doing, one of the best below-the-rim finishers of all time in the NBA. I think he does not get enough love there. I could talk about it for hours and hours. This video is not going to be an 8-hour film study on Steph Curry, although I wish it was, because it would be fantastic enjoyment for me, because I just love talking about Steph Curry. I love watching him play. Klay Thompson, sometimes, it's up and down with watching him play, because when he's on a burner and he can't miss, he's absolutely unbelievable, because hand in his face doesn't matter, knocking it down. And he did hit some really big shots this year for Golden State as well, but there were some struggles. And I think out of everybody on the roster, both him and Draymond, their aging was a little evident this year. Now, I don't think that they're bad players now. I'm not saying that they're way past their prime and that they can't win again. I'm not suggesting any of those things, but I do think we saw somewhat of a downtick from them in terms of where they were both defensively and offensively from previous seasons. And it's not a bad thing, right? They were so, this is a team that's won 4 championships in the last decade. So me saying that isn't saying, oh, they went from good to bad. They went from elite, all-time great to still really good, but not better than everybody else in the league good, especially playing off of each other. And Clay, there's just nights where, they shoot a lot of contested shots, and you have the talent to make those if you're Klay Thompson and Steph Curry, but at times you maybe are settling a little more. And as they age, I think that's going to be an adjustment, specifically more so for Klay than Steph, of, hey, maybe I shouldn't just pull this jump shot, even though I feel confident in my ability to make it, because the shooting numbers do go down a little bit if you are contested. And I still think that while Klay Thompson is a great shooter and a guy that anytime he shoots, you feel like it's a good possession, maybe there are better looks out there for the team other than him just pulling these deep contested shots. And I do think we noticed that a little bit in the fourth quarters of games, especially in the series against Los Angeles Lakers, where just felt like sometimes Klay would hoist a 3 with 4 minutes left in the game, and you're like, is that really the best look we could have gotten? And if you're Klay Thompson, you're saying, well, I'm Klay Thompson, but you're not Klay Thompson 2, 3, 4 years ago before the injuries. You're Klay Thompson right now, which isn't a bad player. Again, I'm not trying to hate on Klay Thompson. I just think that maybe rediscovering what your exact shot amount should be, exactly what type of shots you should be taking, especially in high leverage moments. Now, if it's the second quarter and you're Klay Thompson, go ahead and pull the trigger, right? But maybe with 4 minutes left and 12 seconds on the shot clock, maybe we don't force a contested 3-pointer. And if you're Jordan Poole, maybe we don't shoot a 28-foot 3-pointer with the potential game on the line and Steph Curry on the court. Then we'll talk about this team being first in potential assists as well, which is a byproduct of Klay Thompson shooting so many contested shots. Is typically a lot of those are catch and shoot, and he just pulls the trigger. which means that is potentially an assist. The Warriors do not play out of isolation very much now. I said they do that. They did it more this year, and they did a lot more of it with high pick and roll with Steph because they needed to, but they still move the ball. This team is a fantastically coached team. Steve Kerr, I've said it multiple times. I talk with my best friend a lot about this, about how Steph Curry and Steve Kerr, like literally perfect mates for each other, because everything Steph's meant to do and be great at is all the things Steve Kerr's really great at coaching. Steve Kerr's not a fantastic coach where you could put him in any situation and all of a sudden that team's going to win. I think we saw that with the Warriors when Curry went down and Durant left. This team was really, really bad. Obviously no Clay that year either, and I don't think that's fair to judge Steve Kerr on, but it's the reality that if you don't have Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, you do have to coach the team differently. And the things Kerr wants to do with ball movement and spacing the floor works very well with those two guys. I do think he'd have issues with other teams in the league though, coaching them, but again, it's a perfect mesh. And this is not meant to hate on Steve Kerr at all. He's done a fantastic job with this team because they move the ball, they're very smart, and part of the reason why they're so good when it comes to potential assists is they have a power forward who just plays the game the exact right way. And even though he's not a good scorer, even though he's got some real offensive deficiencies, he basically mitigates all of those by understanding what his skill set is and realizing, hey, if I catch the ball here and my guy's sagging off of me, I can turn this into a dribble handoff, almost grenade action where I'm setting a screen. My guy's way down, basically playing what is essentially drop coverage in the pick and roll, and Steph Curry or Klay Thompson is going to be able to walk into an open jump shot. Draymond does that better than anybody, and he's really vital in the potential assist category as well, because when he is the screen setter specifically for Steph Curry in their high pick and roll, oftentimes Steph will get blitzed or doubled up there. Little slip pass to Draymond Green, catches around the nail, and from there, his playmaking, his decision-making is what helps Golden State and its offense flow and really be a great offense for the majority of their tenure together. Draymond, Steph, and Klay, those three guys have just been so fantastic. I think everybody knows that, but I just want to keep mentioning it because even though they have taken a step back, I mean, this team was still good. There was a very competitive West this year. I know a lot of people like to say it was a bad West. I don't really believe so. I think it was a very competitive West, and a bunch of teams were very bunched together because there's a lot of good competition. Just think about it. Damian Lillard was the 13th seed. If you flash back to about 10 years ago, Danilo Gallinari was the best player on a 6th seed. Okay, it's a little bit of a different Western Conference in terms of the talent, and I think that for the most part, the Warriors, 6th in the West, it doesn't sound as good as normal, but I still think they had a pretty good year, even with some of those struggles that they had. So jumping into the 2023 NBA Draft, they do have pick number 19 that they could look to draft with, but I do think they have a second option as well that is worth mentioning. So we're going to talk about that right now in this video, kind of look through their draft options. Who would they potentially pick at 19, and what would that second option be? So at 19, there's a few players I do like. Derek Lively II out of Duke and Dariq Whitehead out of Duke also make some sense to me as young players. They're both freshmen who are going to be in the draft this year. Derek Lively's kind of the same cloth as James Wiseman, and I think I probably just sent chills down the backs of every single Golden State Warriors fan. Don't worry though, picking him at 19, there's way less pressure on him than selecting him second overall in front of LaMelo Ball. Derek Lively, he's a good rim roller, sets pretty solid screens, he understands his role, which is why I think he would fit with Golden State. He's not going to play outside of it too much. He's a good zone passer as well. I think that's something that's been a little under talked about and under discussed about his game. He just makes a lot of smart decisions as kind of a low man or a middle man against zones, which is an interesting little note on him. Again, that doesn't completely change who he is as a player. Most teams run zone about 8% of the time defensively, so it's not like it's going to completely change him night or day as a prospect, but it's a nice little bonus. Dariq Whitehead, a very good shooter, shot over 40% from three this past year for Duke, despite having kind of some role questions and was dealing with a foot injury. And Golden State, you might say, well, this team doesn't need more shooting. I do think as this team slowly starts to adjust maybe to a little bit more Steph Curry high pick and roll, that maybe Dariq Whitehead being a floor stretcher a little bit, kind of spacing out to the corner, something that Moses Moody and Jonathan Kuminga, I don't think they do a ton of that right now for this Warriors team. And I think having a kind of a gravity guy off of Klay and Steph is pretty interesting, and maybe something that they should look into adding long term, although I don't find it very likely for them. Andre Jackson Jr., a guy who I think is going to be in consideration for the Warriors. This feels like a Warriors type player. He's not the best shooter, but he does a lot of other things well. He defends well. He's a high effort guy. He's going to crash the glass. He's just going to make impact winning plays. And the Warriors, I still think at this spot, do need that. This team, I think that was very notable that the depth was, I would say, a little bit worse than typical for Golden State. Of course, losing Otto Porter Jr. was big. Not having GP2 for the first half of the year after letting him walk in free agency reared its ugly head as well a little bit. I think that Golden State, though, with GP2 back, does fulfill some of their lineup needs, but I still think Andre Jackson Jr. could help them. Jett Howard would be an interesting name for them to add. He's a pretty capable spot-up guy. He can knock it down off catch and shoot opportunities, but outside of that, he also does a pretty nice job handling the rock a little bit. Gives them another guy who maybe you do put the ball in his hands a bit and let him decision make and slash downhill and open up some options. Otherwise, there's two Indiana kids that I really love for different reasons. Let's start with Jalen Hood-Schifino. He's a point guard for the Indiana Hoosiers at 6'4", 6'5"-ish. He's got pretty good frame for the position. And I know Warriors fans are saying, well, we already have guards. We don't really need it. I think Hood-Schifino's got a very similar type of play style to what we saw out of Sean Livingston, the back end of Sean Livingston's career. Livingston, of course, lived in the mid-range. I know everyone here, including me, you guys just have to believe that anytime Sean Livingston shot a mid-range jump shot, it just felt like it was nothing but net, and the other team might as well start taking the ball out of bounds already because it's just he's going to make the shot. And I feel like Jalen Hood-Schifino probably not as lethal of a mid-range shooter as a Sean Livingston was in his 30s, but I do think Hood-Schifino can grow into that. He plays with pretty good balance, gets to 2 feet pretty constantly as a jump shooter, and because of that, he's not off balance. He's not going to fade left or right very frequently. He kind of rises into his shot, which is exactly what you're looking for. And he's pretty smart. And I think he would fit in with Golden State when it comes to kind of reading the floor, making the right decisions, kind of the opposite of Jordan Poole, who does not play on 2 feet, kind of plays out of control a lot. I think Hood-Schifino, probably a better fit, honestly, into Golden State's scheme, even though he's less talented than a Jordan Poole. And then Trayce Jackson-Davis. When we talk about fits, Trayce Jackson-Davis is my favorite fit to Golden State. He's my favorite fit in the entire draft for any team other than Victor Wembanyama to San Antonio. I think Trayce Jackson-Davis would be like an instant A+. Yeah, the Warriors are winners because, yes, he's a senior in college. Yes, maybe the ceiling's not as high as some of these other names, but we hear that every single year. Think about why Jalen Brunson was a second-round pick despite being the National Player of the Year in college. People are going to say, well, Trayce Jackson-Davis, this, that, or the other thing. He's only 6'9" at center. There's gonna be all these issues about why he shouldn't be a first-round pick and this, that, and the other thing. The guy has pretty much every single skill set you're looking for. In college, it was mostly a post-up scorer. He won't do that in the NBA because the points per possession just won't translate very well. He's not going to be an isolation scorer. But if you're Golden State, that's not what you need. Okay, you just don't need that. I think that you need more big rim size. You need more rim protection. You need another guy who can play behind Kevon Looney. And Trayce Jackson-Davis is going to be better than Kevon Looney at certain things because, one, for Indiana, playing for Mike Woodson, yes, he posted up a ton, and because of that, they had him passing out of the post a lot because he's actually a massive plus passer out of the post. And honestly, his assist numbers do not do him justice for how good of a passer he is, because he oftentimes would get hockey assists or kind of start ball reversals by kicking it out after drawing a double and the ball would swing. Trayce Jackson-Davis is very selfless. And I think for Golden State, the team that runs the most post splits in the NBA, he would be such a good addition to this team as a post-up passer, giving them another guy to run it. They've used Wiggins quite a bit. They've used Draymond quite a bit, obviously, in that role. Kevon Looney to a certain extent, but I think Trayce Jackson-Davis would arguably be their best or second best post-split passer on day one of his career. And I think that is a big deal when you're evaluating fit. What kind of sets do they run, and how does Trayce Jackson-Davis fit into that? It's an absolute A+ instant fit. It's, like a fish in water, basically. And then also looking at what else he brings to the team, he is a good screen setter. Golden State always gets away with a little bit extra contact, so maybe Trayce Jackson-Davis could get even a little bit more physical as a screen setter. And out of that, he can hit him on short rolls because, again, he's a good downhill decision maker, but he's got the athleticism to finish it at the rim. And defensively, he has a really nice block radius when he's defending. There are certain times where, he's guarding ball and all of a sudden the guy's going for a reverse layup and you think, oh, the rim's going to mitigate Trayce Jackson-Davis' ability to block the shot, and somehow, some way, he finds a way to maneuver with the guy. And that's part of the benefit of him being a little bit shorter, is I think he's a lot more fluid laterally, and I think he's quite a bit quicker than your traditional 7-foot center would be. And because of that, it kind of fits into the way that Golden State wants to play, with kind of a quicker style. They were number 1 in pace this year in the NBA, which has been, of course, a staple of their offenses. And I think Trayce Jackson-Davis, he has the speed to be a rim runner for them. He has the passing skill set to pass out of the post. He's got the passing skill set to be a short roll passer. And I also think defensively, he can protect the rim and give them another option for when Kevon Looney's not in the game. And he can also help clean the glass and really help this team win a lot of games in the regular season going into next year. I think Trayce Jackson-Davis, pick 19 might sound really high for him. I don't care. Draft a good player if you think he's a good player, and I really 100% believe he is. Then we look at option number 2, which is trade down pick 19, and there's 2 teams that have a collection of picks within the next 10 or 15 spots afterward. The Pacers have 3 of them, picks 26, 29, and 32, kind of in that same ballpark range. Obviously, these teams have other assets as well, but we're talking about trading down here for Golden State, and I think these are the numbers that make some sense. And then the Hornets have picks 27 and 34. So from Indiana, could you possibly get picks 26 and 29 for 19, or possibly 26 and 32 for pick 19? And then if you're trading with the Hornets, can you get 27 and 34? If these 2 organizations, if one of them has a player highlighted, maybe a Bilal Coulibaly or another guy that they'd like to move up for and get, is that something that the Golden State Warriors would have interest in doing? And I think that there should be some consideration in that, because maybe you could still draft Trayce Jackson-Davis a little bit later, maybe at pick 26 or at pick 27. I think it would be a real possibility, although I'd be a little hesitant about trading to 27 if the Pacers are keeping 26, because maybe, just maybe, they're going to draft the in-state guy, Trayce Jackson-Davis. But 2 picks for 1 pick, I do think should be on the table for Golden State this offseason. One thing, just watching them this year, I think you can tell there's going to be some long-term questions about the depth of this team and how many guys can they realistically roll out there in a playoff series. So I think having 2 swings in the first round of this year's draft, or 2 swings in the first 34 picks, could go a long way in helping this team kind of refill out their depth and add some more players. Maybe that's a Noah Clowney out of Alabama. Maybe that's a Dylan Mitchell out of Texas. Again, like I said, Trayce Jackson-Davis really still could be on the table for them. So depending on the assets you're getting back, I would at least consider it, especially if you feel like the guys that you like in this draft could fall to you or be there at those spots. It just does open up their window, especially with the new CBA being ushered in. The Warriors, I think, have to be creative, and trading down from 19 to pick up 2 picks instead of 1 is a good starting point for them to add a little bit more depth. Going on to 2023 NBA free agency, and in the words of Joe Lacob, what's cap space? Because we really don't know. I think one of the most important things, I should have maybe even mentioned this in its own little portion of the video, but maybe I'll talk about it a little bit here. Bob Myers, he is up for an extension, or not even an extension, a new contract, because he's essentially right now a free agent executive. And he's, of course, the guy that built a vast majority of what you see in Golden State. And I think that there's some real questions about what that's going to look like for this team going forward if Bob Myers isn't the lead decision maker. But in his tenure, really, cap space hasn't been a thing since they first signed Andre Iguodala, other than the offseason that they could sign Kevin Durant because of the cap spike. We're not going to talk about that in this video, though. Players to retain: Draymond Green, $27.58 million player option. Andre Iguodala, I have a question mark there because I think it's very likely he retires. Of course, there's some rumors about that. I think it's a real possibility, of course. But if not, he would probably be the 15th guy on the roster once again. Dante DiVincenzo, a $4.75 million player option for himself. Does he opt into that? He played very well this season for them. I think it's possible he opts out, although is the team going to give him more? I don't think he'll get the non-taxpayer mid-level exception around that $12.2 million mark. So is it possible some team gives him $6, $7, $8 million, or maybe partial non-taxpayer mid-level? We'll see. I mean, it's a possibility. I think they'd like to have him back, though. I think all of these players on the screen they'd like to have back, maybe outside of JaMychal Green. Anthony Lamb and Ty Jerome were the two-way players this team had throughout most of the season. Of course, Anthony Lamb got converted to a standard NBA contract prior to the postseason. Ty Jerome did not, but I know Warriors fans really like him as well. I think that, Lamb and Jerome do have long futures in the league. Now, it's not going to ever be like, oh, this is a top 6 player in our rotation type of guy, but I think that maybe at some point one of them or both of them become top 9 guys in your rotation, which means some playoff minutes occasionally in like higher leverage situations than what we saw this year for both Lamb and Jerome. And JaMychal Green, I mean, he had like one really notable game for the Warriors all year. I don't think that they need to worry about keeping him. I just didn't really love him as an addition for them to begin with. But maybe, just maybe, they would look into it a little bit. So, free agency, is there any additions I could see them making? They do have the taxpayer mid-level exception open. Of course, they don't actually have cap space to go out and sign anybody. So, if they do use the taxpayer mid-level, they would be hard capped. That's not really the biggest issue, though, because it might be worth doing since there's some adjustments to the CBA. Since this offseason, they can only trade up to 110% of the money that they're sending out. So, for example, if they were sending out a $10 million contract, the most this offseason they could take back in then would be $11 million, whereas comparatively in the past, that number would have been $12.5 million because of some of the new rules. They're kind of smoothing into the new rules a little bit. And going into next offseason, that rule would actually be 100% instead of 110%. So if you're trading a $10 million contract, the most amount of money you could take back in the deal would be exactly $10 million. So hard capping yourself is really not that big of a deal. That was typically something teams would try to avoid doing, was entering a situation where you'd be hard capped because it meant you couldn't take in any extra money. Well, with the new CBA, teams that are spending probably wouldn't even be opposed to hard capping themselves anyway, because it just gives you another guy that you could potentially trade and you could add more contracts together. So paying $6.6 million isn't necessarily a bad thing, because if you trade 6.6 plus, say 12, you're at an $18.6 million mark instead of just having only the $12 million contract to trade. It does open up some pathways, especially since the new CBA is essentially hard capping you anyway. A year from now. Now, this year, maybe the Warriors don't look to do it because of that 110% threshold. It still keeps some pathways open, especially if they do want to look into a Jordan Poole trade. I'm not going to rule anything out for Golden State. I know people are saying, well, this team's looking to shave off money. I think shaving money is something that if you can avoid doing is definitely something you should avoid doing. The new CBA is going to be tough on teams that spend, but if you're smart and creative still and you want to win, you have to spend some money. And the best thing to do for the Warriors right now is to not shave off money to save money. It's just doing that doesn't make them more competitive. Trading away or not re-signing to begin with Gary Payton II and Otto Porter Jr. did not make them better. It just did not. Now, I don't think it had as big of an impact as other people seem to believe. I think the Draymond punch had a little bit more impact than some of those other things, but you just don't want to let guys go for nothing. It's just not good practice in the NBA. It just really isn't. Look at what happened to the Lakers when they let Alex Caruso walk. They didn't get better. In fact, they got a lot worse, and then they needed to find Austin Reeves to kind of offset some of that loss that they had from Caruso leaving to Chicago. You just can't really afford to let guys go that are good quality NBA players. And if you have a chance to use your taxpayer to bring in a good quality player, it's still something you should do, especially if you're in the position that Golden State is with the new CBA. But I didn't really have anyone that I love for them. I wouldn't hate Joe Ingles. I wouldn't hate Jay Crowder, but it's like, does that move the needle for Golden State? Maybe not. And then because of the tax and the amount of money that would cost them, that's where it makes sense. You have to weigh, like, how much better does this actually make us? And if the answer isn't fairly significantly, then you don't spend the money. But I think that there's a notion going around right now that Golden State's just not going to spend at all. I think they'll spend as long as it's under the right situation. They're about to give Bob Myers probably the biggest contract an executive's ever received, especially now that the Washington Wizards position's filled. So we'll see what happens with that. But I think the Warriors are they're going to look into spending if it makes sense to do so. So the early outlook for next year, and I think it really does hinge on Steph Curry. And as long as you have Steph Curry, I would argue you're going to be a very good team, because that's what he did this year. Even with all the things, all the issues around the organization, Steph Curry was out there. Steph Curry's one of the 10 best players in the world every single night, oftentimes one of the best 3 players in the world. And because of that, this team's going to win. They're going to be an above 500 team again. I think the one big concern I have is Draymond Green. If he walks, how do you replace that? And it's going to be a really tough challenge for them. But I think that for the most part, I would expect Draymond Green to be back with Golden State next season. And because of that, I think this team's going to settle in to a better position than where they're currently at. Just because I feel like there's going to be a little bit more confidence in each other again. And there's just going to be more time that's passed since the whole Draymond Poole incident. And because of that, I think that they're just going to be a little bit more comfortable. And I think the team's going to maybe take a step closer to being back to where they were. And losing in the Western Conference playoffs, I think, is a pretty good wake-up call to them as like, hey, maybe we need to prioritize the regular season a little bit more and try and set ourselves up for really good success and playing in front of fans at the Chase Center. I think they're going to be fine. You know, it doesn't mean they're going to win a title again. Maybe not, but going into next year, I would bet on this team being very, very good, just like they typically are. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. It was fun covering the Golden State Warriors. Really enjoyed this team and exactly everything that they do. I just think that they're a really well-polished unit and a team that's very well coached and a lot of fun to watch. So I hope you guys had as much fun watching this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.